Major funding for the production of Campaign 83, the TREEN-EDWARDS debates, is provided by Exxon Company USA's Baton Rouge refinery, a partner in growth with Louisiana since 1909.
Hello, I'm Rick McMillan, President of the Louisiana JCs. Welcome to the Great Pelican State Debates, project of the Louisiana JCs and JC Women. The JCs and JC Women are bipartisan leadership training organizations dedicated to individual development through community action. By completing our projects, the communities in which we serve benefit in two ways. First, a community need is fulfilled by the project being completed, whether it is in the governmental affairs portfolio, such as tonight's program, our muscular dystrophy, merit scholarship, our Outstanding Young People of Louisiana Awards, or one of the countless local chapter projects. The JCs and JC Women are getting the job done. Second, and more important, is the resource of trained young men and women that is provided to our communities. Today's young people are tomorrow's leaders, and the JCs and JC Women are preparing our members for those leadership roles now. If you are between the ages of 18 and 35 and would like to join us in our work, or if you would like to learn more about the JCs and JC Women, contact your local chapter or telephone 318-992-4169. And now join us for one of the most important events of the 1983 political year, the Great Pelican State Debates, a public service of the Louisiana JCs.
Live from Baton Rouge, the Louisiana JCs and Louisiana Public Broadcasting present Campaign 83, the TREEN-EDWARDS debates. From the A.D. Smith Auditorium in Baton Rouge, moderator for tonight's debate, Beth George Courtney, Public Affairs Director for LPB.
Good evening. Welcome to this meeting between the two leading candidates for the office of Governor of the state of Louisiana. This program is being carried live on the 6 stations of Louisiana Public Broadcasting, WYES-TV in New Orleans, and the stations of the Louisiana Radio Network. We are grateful to the Louisiana JCs for providing this forum, and we hope it will be an informative and thought-provoking evening. It is my pleasure to introduce the candidates to you. At my right is the present governor of the state of Louisiana, David C. Treen. Governor Treen is 55 years old. He was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and was educated in New Orleans, where he received a law degree from Tulane University. Governor Treen is a Republican who was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 1972 from the 3rd Congressional District. He served there until his election as governor in 1979. At my left is former Governor Edwin W. Edwards. Governor Edwards is 56 years old. He was born in Marksville, Louisiana, and received a law degree from Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. Governor Edwards is a Democrat who entered politics as a Crowley City Councilman and has served as a state senator and United States Congressman from the 7th Congressional District. He was elected governor in 1971 and was re-elected in 1975. This evening, these two gentlemen will be questioned by a panel of reporters, including Bob Courtney, who is Assistant News Director of WBRZ-TV in Baton Rouge, Ronni Patriquin, who is Capitol Bureau Chief for the Shreveport Journal, John Hill, the Louisiana Bureau Chief for Gannett News Service and USA Today, and Robyn Ekings, who is a Capitol Correspondent for Louisiana Public Broadcasting. Tonight, we will begin our debate with 1-minute opening statements from each candidate. Our panel of reporters will then ask questions alternating between Governor Treen and Governor Edwards. The candidate asks a question will be allowed 2 minutes for a response, and his opponent will be allowed a 2-minute rebuttal. If the reporter feels the question is not being answered, he or she may interrupt the candidate, at which point the clock will be stopped and then started again at the previously elapsed time. The debate will conclude with 2-minute closing statements from each gentleman. Our purpose this evening is to listen to the remarks of the invited candidates, and we would ask our audience to refrain from any outbursts. This is agreed upon by both Governor Treen and Governor Edwards. By a toss of the coin earlier this evening, we have determined that Governor Treen will open the debate and Governor Edwards will close the debate. Good luck to each of you.
First of all, thanks to the JCs and to LPB for sponsoring this program. One of the great fundamentals of our democracy is the periodic right of the people to choose their elected officials. This involves a high degree of responsibility on the part of the citizens to look at the candidates hard, look at their records, look at what they're saying, try to discern the truth. It also involves a responsibility on the part of those who offer themselves for public office. They have the responsibility always to speak the truth. If they make a mistake, to correct it as soon as possible. I mention this because I've become alarmed at some of the misrepresentations that are being made by my opponent in this race. I don't have time to give them all to you, but two examples. For example, in this brochure produced by the Edwards campaign, it is stated that during Edwards' term, 10,000 miles of highways were constructed in Louisiana. Absolutely preposterous. Also, is that the signal?
We're out of time.
Sorry.
You'll have time later, Governor Edwards.
You can spend some of your time looking for those extra miles. You're going to hear figures bandied about during this and other debates. For instance, Governor Treen will accurately say he put more money in education, but the facts are that the percentage of the state's revenue dollars that went into education has fallen since the last year I was governor. Both statements are correct. It depends how you use the figures. My desire is to have you look at the bottom line, whether we use relative figures, percents of values, or absolute figures, because basically it's what happens when it finally reaches the people that makes a difference. And during these debates, I would ask you to watch for that, because that will become a very important part of the debates.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now the first question to you, Governor Treen.
Governor Treen, a recent Common Cause report revealed that 38 people who contributed $5,000 or more to your 1979 gubernatorial campaign were rewarded with appointments to influential boards and commissions after your election. Also, the 4 Democratic candidates who endorsed you were appointed to high-paying cabinet-level positions in your administration. Does this practice give the impression that friends, political, and financial supporters have been directly rewarded for their election aid at the expense of the taxpayers?
It certainly doesn't in my case, and that has to be just a matter of course, belief by the public and as to whether they have faith in the basic integrity of the individual involved. Obviously, people are going to be appointed to public office by candidates that are supported by these people. I would direct your attention to the fact that there were, I suppose, thousands of people that contributed to my campaign. As a matter of fact, I know there were thousands, and I would venture to say probably in the order of hundreds in that $5,000 or more category. And so that if only 38 got appointments, you might say that, well, what happened to all the others? Many, many people supported my effort, and I chose some who supported me. Obviously, the people that are supportive of a candidate, that are loyal to him, that want him to succeed, make good candidates. The question is whether or not it was done on a quid pro quo basis. And I would suggest to you, for that magnitude of contribution, not many of the people I appointed would expect that just compensation. With respect to the men who I appointed to office who supported me, I felt it important to have a bipartisan administration when I became governor, first Republican governor in 100 years. And I thought these distinguished leaders would make great assets to my administration. Indeed, I think they did.
Well, I think it's interesting how this politician can get elected by political processes and then proceed to run a political administration, and then all of a sudden it somehow becomes wholly indecent. I'm not going to criticize him for the kind of appointments he made. I think that the net effect has been a rather weak administration, and whether or not he appointed these people because they gave him large sums of money is something that he has to address to his own conscience, and the people of this state will have to make a decision. I would like to hear him say one more time 4 years later, as he said a number of times in 1979, that he'd made no deals with those 4 Democratic people that endorsed him, in spite of what has happened after he was elected. Not that I think it's all that bad, except I think I would have been a little more honest and said, hey, these people are going to help me get elected. They're qualified. I intend to use them in my administration, and I would have proceeded to do that. It's part of the process in Louisiana, and the thing I think that makes the difference is whether or not the person appointed, regardless of whether or not a contribution was made, is qualified for the job that he is appointed to. I have a real concern about putting someone like the gentleman who's in charge of the Department of Public Safety, a very important function of government, who has no experience in law enforcement, knows nothing at all about it, and whose sole contribution to life and business has been he was a successful boat builder. I would take a person like that and put him on Commerce and Industries where he could use his expertise, but I would not use people, no matter how much they contributed to me, and give them positions that they were not otherwise qualified for, and I think that's where the line of demarcation is.
Thank you. Ronni Patriquin, your question.
Well, this question is directed to Governor Edwards, but I would expect to get an answer from both of you. Louisiana is in the grips of a really deep recession. State agency budgets have been trimmed severely. Both of you are promising pay raises for teachers and state employees in the neighborhood of 10%, and that will cost more than $200 million annually. There are also other costs of government which go up automatically each year. If the state's revenue picture does not improve significantly in the next few months, which of the following taxes do you intend to increase? Income taxes, personal and corporate, other business taxes, sales tax, the so-called sin taxes on beer, booze, cigarettes, and possibly gambling, a state property tax, severance, or other taxes on oil, gas, and other mineral resources, or any other tax. Please be specific.
Well, I'm kind of hoping that some kind of miracle will happen between now and next March, and Governor Treen will straighten out the state's finances, and he'll leave me with a big surplus as I left him, and I won't have to look at that. But I don't think that's going to happen, so I'm prepared to deal with it, both as a candidate and as governor. And I think it would be unwise and unfair of either of us or any reasonable candidate running for governor to suggest that we could do the things that you have articulated without additional revenue.
Which taxes then, please?
If I've got to get the taxes, then I propose to go back to the income tax base we had in 1980, which if it had not been tampered with, I think we would have most of our financial problems solved today. But I do want to make this statement. There are about 200,000 taxpayers who make $16,000 or less who would probably be adversely impacted by that move. They would pay an average of $35 a year in income taxes. So rather than impose that burden on them, I would exempt that category of people. It would cost a net loss of about $7 million. And what I would do is to change the formula so that those persons with one spouse and 2 children earning $16,000 or less would not otherwise be impacted. I think the rest of the people who are in the higher income categories, such as I, will just have to be reasonable and understand that the gratuity which they got in 1980, giving them a temporary respite, has lived its time out, and that the needs for the state will require us to go back to the 1980 levels. If I've got to go to taxes, that's where I propose to do it.
Any other ones?
No.
Well, with respect to the income tax, I find it interesting, and this is what I was alluding to in my opening statement, that the former governor is now going around the state saying that he and others warned Dave Treen not to tamper with the tax base back in 1980 when I proposed the income tax cut. The fact of the matter is he's quoted by various newspapers and one wire service after I made the proposal saying absolutely right. He's absolutely right to make that tax cut. And I think that I was right. We took people off the...
Excuse me, Governor. I understand, you're explaining that cut, but can you please tell us what tax is...
I thought this was my rebuttal time, but I'll be pleased to answer
I said
your
this question was directed to both of you. We'd like to know what specific taxes you're looking at in case you have to.
First of all, I do not agree with you that it is an absolute certainty that taxes will have to be raised. I believe that the economy is coming back, will come back strong, and I believe certainly for the operational budget, it's entirely within the realm of possibility that taxes would not have to be raised. But I will try to respond and tell you that if we had to have a tax, then I favor the sin taxes, the alcohol and tobacco taxes, the so-called sin taxes. I don't want to condemn everybody that smokes as being sinful, or even takes the scotch and water now and then. But I do think that if one looks at those rates on tobacco and alcohol, then one would have to conclude that they haven't been raised in a long, long time. They're based upon volume, not on value, and the price of these things has gone up tremendously, very, very low compared to other states, and I would think that that would be a good place if we had to have some additional taxes. But I'm not going to put people back on the tax roll that we're making $6,800. The poverty line is $10,000 a year in Louisiana. And the way we cut those taxes was to raise those exemptions and to raise the deductions for dependents and also raise the handicap tax credit from $20 to $100, and I don't propose to put those taxes back.
Thank you. John Hill, a question for Governor Treen.
Yes, I'd also like an answer from both candidates on this. Much of northeast and southeast Louisiana has spent a good deal of time underwater in the last 10 years, particularly this past year. Every time there's a flood, politicians make a big show of going out and saying we've got to help these people and do something about drainage in this state. There is a statewide drainage program, but there's very little funding. How would you implement this drainage program? How would you pay for it? Would you support a statewide property tax? If not that, what other tax? And would you require participation by local government, including those in poor rural areas such as northeast Louisiana that really can't afford to help pay for the projects?
Well, you're right. When it floods, public officials often go to the flood areas, and I think that in many cases that's sincere. When the President of the United States came to northeast Louisiana, I accompanied him. He gave us a declaration of disaster very quickly after that, and I thought that was sound. I believe that to a certain extent the state should shoulder the burden of the massive flood and drainage problems that we have in Louisiana. And I do think that local government should participate. It might be a varying formula, John, based upon the capacity of that particular area. But I think there should be some participation. If you don't have some money being put up by the local residents, then you have no discipline in the system whatsoever. Right now, the program calls for 70% state funding and 30% local funding. I think that's a good formula, and perhaps it could be varied if there's a situation where the people simply cannot afford it. Insofar as funding for the program is concerned, I did propose, of course, for capital outlay, the QUEL program, which, and I specifically said that would be an area that we could get funding for drainage. I would think, though, that the Public Works Fund, which has been cut back a little bit lately, but usually runs $25 to $30 million, I think a large part of that Public Works Fund could go to the drainage account. As a matter of fact, frankly, I would welcome that to get rid of some of that. A lot of that Public Works Fund goes to individual drainage projects anyway. So I would suggest that we might get, rather than funding that, we might get $15 to $20 million from that, and then from some of the other sources that I mentioned a moment ago, perhaps alcohol, tobacco, could get you another $10 to $20 million. And I would think $50 million a year from the state at the outset would be sufficient.
No property tax?
Not for the state portion, no.
I don't think it's realistic to expect local governments, strapped as they already are for financial resources, to bear the burdens of 30% of the tremendous cost of any kind of effective flood program. My own view is that this is a state and a national problem. We should definitely accelerate our efforts to get federal funds, because the Mississippi River is draining something like 41% of the United States east of the Rocky Mountains through Louisiana. We are impacted by that. The rest of the nation benefits from it, and we have a good case to make. Be that as it may, I'm prepared to borrow $100 to $150 million a year, as long as I'm governor, to match federal funds or local funds, or to get the program started. We've borrowed over $1.15 billion in the last 3 years and really have little to show for it. $100 million annual borrowing on a 30-year bonded debt would cost the state about $10 million a year to repay. It's a small price to pay when you consider that you'd be removing the serious consequences of floods every 2 years, which have been damaging on the average of $200 to $300 million every 2 years. I think from a standpoint of dollars, and we are coming out well by moving ahead and putting up the money and getting the program done, not counting the loss of lives and the fear that some people have to live in constant threat of flooding. I just don't think it should be permitted or continued. I'm prepared to move.
The next question from Robyn Ekings for Governor Edwards.
Governor Edwards, earlier this week you promised to give up your salary as governor until the unemployment rate in Louisiana drops below the national average. That move in itself will not put one person to work. What specific program will you support to create new jobs and bring Louisiana's unemployment rate down?
It will put one person to work, me, because I'm going to work as hard as I can, as fast as I can to bring it down. And I would not have made this statement if I were not fully convinced that within a matter of a few months, maybe a year, but within a matter of a few months, we can begin to edge down the unemployment rates in Louisiana. it is, in my judgment, almost a crime that we have 13% unemployment while the rest of the nation is only suffering 9.5%. Now, specifically,
how are we going to do that? Yeah.
Number one, oil and gas industry. I think we have dampened drilling and other exploratory efforts in Louisiana by a poor attitude in state government. I know of one instance now that a well is not being drilled because the drillers are unable to get the last red tape cut by the Coastal Zone Commission. I would intervene and get that done. I'm going to arrange meetings, and I've already started doing it with those in those companies that commit the funds for drilling. And I think I can get some gentleman's agreement from them right after the election to drill one additional well each in Louisiana to stimulate, because from the drilling site, there's a ripple effect. Boats begin to work, trucks run, the support services begin to operate. The ripple effect in the oil industry is very dramatic, and I think in that one area we can do much. Second, in last year, some 23 plants in Louisiana closed, costing 3,000 jobs. I do not believe any effort was made. I may be wrong, and he follows me after this. Any effort was made to try to keep those plants open. I'm told that no phone calls came from the governor's office, no visits were made, no efforts were said, hey, what can I do? I did some of that when I was governor, when the Bogalusa problem occurred. I went over there, I met with them, we went to San Francisco, we at least halted or slowed down the closing at the Bogalusa plant. That's the kind of thing that I think we can do, and over a staged period of time, by combining that with an intense effort to bring new industry, which I think has slowed down in the last 3 years, I believe ultimately I can start getting my salary back.
Well, first of all, if one wants to return salary because the unemployment rate in Louisiana is higher than the national average, then maybe the former governor should give back his salary for 6 of the 8 years that he was governor, because the unemployment rate in Louisiana was higher than the national average during 6 of those 8 years. With respect to his allegation that Dave Treen has not made an effort to keep plants open, of course he is dead wrong in this, as he is on so many things that he makes allegations about. Spent a great deal of my time talking to companies that, because of the national recession that we're having, particularly in the petrochemical industry, that feel economic compulsion to shut down plants and to try to thwart that. And in some cases, I think, to some success.
On programs
yes,
to address
again,
the
I keep thinking this is rebuttal. So, yes, we have some specific ideas that we've already implemented, many of them. And I think that they are forward-looking. For example, the enterprise zone legislation, which was passed. We've approved 21 applications for new businesses as a result of that. This is the state and local government giving up some of its taxes for a limited period of time in order to encourage a company to come in. As a matter of fact, new permanent jobs for those 21 applications alone, total 1,778. We've saved permanent jobs of 694 and created 955 construction jobs. The new permanent payroll over 5 years from that program alone is $214 million. In addition, the Industry Assistance Act, Mr. Edwards, specifically saved Cast Metals, a company up in northwest Louisiana, and also Dixie Brewery in New Orleans as a result of that legislation. More recently, the venture capital legislation that was passed under my auspices will provide an additional incentive for new business and industry.
Thank you, Governor Treen. We are now going to reverse the order and go back down the panel so each of these reporters gets to ask a question of the other candidate. We'll begin now with Robyn Ekings, who has a question for Governor Treen.
Governor Treen, during the 1982-83 school year, the state gave nearly $20 million in aid to private schools for such things as transportation, food, and material costs. Now, that's nearly 9 times what the state was giving about 8 years ago. While private school enrollment is up, the enrollment in public schools is down. For example, the East Baton Rouge Parish School District has lost over 7,000 students and more than $7 million in state aid since court-ordered desegregation went into effect 2 years ago. Given your commitment to improve the quality of education in Louisiana, do you think the state can afford to give so much to private schools when the public schools are losing students and funds? And would you support repeal of any legislation that now gives aid to private schools?
I'll answer your last question first. No, I will not support legislation to repeal the aid that we give to the private schools. Let's consider the order of magnitude. You say $20 million. We spend over $1 billion a year on the minimum foundation formula alone for elementary and secondary education. So you're talking about 2%. That's not going to solve the problem if you eliminate that aid to private schools. State aid for some school districts is declining because the population, the student population in those school districts is declining, and it's based upon a formula. The fact of the matter is that we have increased funding for elementary secondary education on a per pupil basis 40% since I've been governor. The state budget has gone up about 33%. So you can see the emphasis has been there. I think the private schools of this state, including the parochial schools, and the Catholic Church does a fantastic job, in my opinion, along with other private school systems, of educating the children of Louisiana. And I think some modest, moderate aid, and it is modest when you consider what we're spending on public education, to keep those schools going and to keep them alive is a benefit to all the people of this state, because indeed they take a tremendous burden off the taxpayers of Louisiana. So I don't think that $20 million is exorbitant at all, and it's just a drop in the bucket as to what we're spending in public education, which incidentally totals about $1,740,000,000 for public education.
Most, if not all, of those programs that were initiated during my administration. I have a concern for a student getting an education anywhere. I want every child to get the best education possible. I would not propose either diminishing or increasing the emoluments that are now provided to assist those students. I think we've gone as far as we need to go, but on the other hand, I must agree with Governor Treen that if we begin to diminish it, we would have a reverse impact on the public school system, because if my memory is right, there are about 60,000 children in the public and private school sector, and the public system could not withstand the impact of an influx of a large percentage of those students going back to the public schools. Our primary interest, of course, is the public schools. That's what our job will be as governor, whichever of us is elected. But at the same time, it's part of an overall educational problem. And my simple answer to you is that I think the programs in place are legitimate, proper, and needed, and I would not propose to tamper with them.
John Hill has a question now for Governor Edwards.
Governor Edwards, the cost of campaigning in Louisiana for governor is obscene. It is much higher than campaigning for governor in any other state, including New York. You're planning to spend about $10 million in this campaign. Governor Treen, I believe, is planning to spend about $5 million. Earlier in the campaign, you proposed the two of you conduct a low-budget grassroots race with no campaign spending. That many people considered that a campaign ploy on your part. Without getting into the merits or demerits of that proposal, is there any practical way to limit the cost of campaigning for governor in this state? Do you have any plans to try and control future campaign spending? And would you lobby the legislature to pass appropriate campaign financial limitations?
First, it's not really accurate to say that it's higher here than any other state. In West Virginia, for instance, Jay Rockefeller spent $12 million of his own money in a campaign. It got so bad the bumper stickers for his opponent said, "Make him spend it." And another bumper sticker said, "Spend it, Jay, it's yours." It certainly is obscene, and I regret it very much. That's why I made this serious proposal that nobody took serious back in February. It's silly for us to hustle our friends and supporters and the already oppressed businessmen and women in Louisiana for millions of dollars for these campaigns. We're not going to change by 5% the outcome of this election after spending $8, $9, or $10 or $15 million between the two of us. And I knew that in February. I know it now. I say it again. And I'm really sorry that the proposal was not accepted for what it was, a serious opportunity to do something about it. My only response further to the question is, yes, there is something we can and should do. And it's what the Europeans and other people are doing in some areas, and that's limit the time within which a candidate can spend a nickel for any purpose. For instance, I would support and maybe propose a proposal that no candidate, until he is actually qualified, can spend a nickel for a barbecue, a bumper sticker, a TV ad, a newspaper ad, or any other purpose. That would, instead of having a 2 and 3 and 4 year race such as those we've experienced in the last decade in this state, we would end up with maybe a 8 to 10 week race, and I think would greatly reduce the cost of campaigning at no without diminishing the value of a campaign and letting the public know what the candidates stand for. I think you will find that the U.S. Supreme Court has been rather reluctant to rule its constitutional efforts to limit the amount of money that a candidate can spend, claiming that it's his constitutional right to do so. But I think a limitation of time would definitely have that effect, and I would support it.
We're out of time. Governor Treen?
Well, first of all, it's often said, why would people spend $5 or $6 or $10 million for an office that pays $73,000 a year? And of course, that's not the point. The governor of this state will have authority over a budget which approaches $6 billion, and he'll have that for 4 years, so $24 billion. It's an extremely important office. It's important that the people know what the facts are. And oftentimes, it's only possible to get those facts across if you go into the media, into the paid media. Not that the unpaid media doesn't do a job, but oftentimes you have to, in order to make a point, buy a newspaper ad, television spots, or other forms of advertising. Now, my opponent did make some suggestion about limiting campaign spending by not having paid media, and he suggested, for example, that billboards are meaningless advertising. I agree with that. We're not spending any money on billboards. He's spending maybe $400,000 for billboards. He already has name recognition. I don't know why he's doing that, but that's his privilege to do it that way. But certain types of advertising are important. Advertising that carries a message that brings out the facts. And insofar as limitation is concerned on time, I would welcome that. As a matter of fact, I said many times leading up to this campaign that I thought 2.5 months of a campaign would be about all that the people of this state could stand, and I don't know if they can stand that much. But my opponent started campaigning just about the day that I got inaugurated as governor. So he set, you know, the pace of the campaign early on. But I do think that the main thing that can be done and is being done is to report. And we sponsored legislation when I became governor in the first session to require more meaningful reporting of contributions. Let people see where the money's coming from and then let them make their judgment.
Ronni, a question for Governor Treen.
Governor Treen, you've criticized Governor Edwards' special retirement bill. Governor Edwards, you've responded by criticizing the retirement of Governor Treen's top aides, the 4 former Democrats. Or they're still Democrats, but sorry. Anyway, state legislators also enjoy special retirement benefits and are allowed credit for time served in part-time local elected offices such as school board, city council, mayor. Politicians reap the best benefits without doubt from the state employees' retirement systems, which are already financially rather unstable. Do you think it proper that elected and appointed public servants, especially those who are in part-time jobs, that they should be given special retirement plans which are better than those given the state's civil servants and teachers?
I think that the retirement program has been abused by public officials, and I know that this is not going to sit well with some legislators, but I think counting of time, and I don't say that legislators shouldn't have some retirement, but I certainly don't think the 3.5% per year, the multiple that they get, is proper. Certainly it's not proper to count time, such as was done in the special retirement bill that I have criticized the former governor about, to count time on the Crowley City Council, which paid $50 a month, I believe, those 8 years, to count time in the Congress when there was a retirement plan for members of Congress, and to add all of those things together. No, I think that some changes should be made in that. I don't think you can affect people that are vested. The law is pretty clear on that. But I think that we ought to make some changes for the future. I have not participated in retirement myself, and don't intend to if reelected as governor of the state. I'm going to try to provide for myself in other ways. But it has been abused, and I think corrective action needs to be taken.
If I might be allowed, just a brief follow-up. If you are reelected, will you work with the few people in the legislature who have been trying to change the retirement laws?
Yes, I will. As a matter of fact, I tried to help Senator Sid Nelson in the Senate with one change in the retirement system to require that new people coming into the system would not retire until they were 62 years of age, I believe. That's another problem. People retire early on and then they go out and get another job. I think that's an abuse. You can't affect the people that are in the system, But certainly that type of change for the future should be looked at and looked at hard.
Retirement systems have become a part of political and private employment in this country. I think it's important, as you properly pointed out, that this is not a special deal for Edwin Edwards. Legislators, school board members, many public officials participated in the retirement system. I agree that this one is somewhat lavish. It is certainly a good one. It is not as good as the congressional retirement system that both of us participate in, but nevertheless, it is a good one. And I'm going to take the position that we should provide a reasonable retirement for legislators or people in public life who remain in public life for a reasonable length of time, say 20 years or maybe 25 or maybe 30 years. In my case, it's 28 years up until now. You know, you can get into a long argument about that. Many people would say no retirement whatsoever. But then you would have people who are good public servants at age 40 looking and saying, hey, I'm not getting anywhere. The job doesn't pay very much. I've got my future to think about. And I think many worthwhile public servants would be forced to get out of the system because of their own interest in providing for their families and themselves in their twilight years. It's one of those continuing dialogues that, in my judgment, there's really no good answer for except the word reasonable. What is reasonable? There should be some relationship between the length of time served, the amount of pay, the importance of the office, and the age of retirement.
Will you make any changes, or will you try to if you're elected governor?
I certainly am not going to make any more changes in my favor. You can bet that. But I might suggest that in spite of this becoming a campaign issue, little or nothing has been done in the last 4 legislative sessions to try to change it. Much criticism has come, but there was no criticism when it was passed in '76, none when I joined, none when I participated in 1980, and none until you, Ms. Patriquin, raised it in one of your columns.
Bob Courtney, a question for Governor Edwards.
Governor, during your first 2 terms in office, you grabbed national attention on a couple of occasions by calling environmentalists long-haired hippies in tennis shoes and microbuses who were impeding progress. Now we know that much of that progress brought with it dangerous, hazardous waste pits, threatened drinking water supplies, and an overdependence on oil and gas and related industries for state revenues. Do you think it's time the state reassess the inducements that it has offered to attract these industries in light of the liabilities that they bring with them? In particular, the 10-year property tax exemption, which, if eliminated, would provide approximately $70 million a year in new revenues for local governments, which is roughly 3/4 of the state's current revenue-sharing program for local government.
My criticism of environmentalists was exclusively directed at those who opposed offshore development on the East Coast. We were in a national energy crisis. We in Louisiana were drilling and doing everything we could to produce oil and gas. They were sitting on supposed reservoirs of oil and gas and were refusing to allow oil and gas companies to try to develop the East Coast. I thought that was blind opposition, and in retrospect, it turned out it was blind opposition because there has been drilling out there with no damage to the environment. I never came out for dirty water, dirty air, or dirty soil, or for hazardous waste. You know, I know I have that reputation, but I can say without fear of contradiction, I never spoke out for a bad environment.
But, Governor, many of these polluters that are now polluting the environment are getting that tax exemption.
I got national criticism because I said something that was honest one day. We allowed industry to come to Louisiana for 40 years without being as careful as we should have been. I did that. Governors before me did it. Industry did it. Municipalities did it. We all did it. But it was the truth. Now, we now, in retrospect, see the error of our ways, and what we need to do is to stop it and make certain that industries coming in here can provide employment, use our natural resources, but not pollute our environment. If they cannot do that, then they shouldn't be allowed to come. We should also make certain that those that are now here continue to operate only if their operations are consistent with a clean environment.
Should we continue to give them the 10-year property tax
Oh,
exemption?
yes, that's something that we need to do in order to continue to compete for industry, just as many other states are doing. And certainly with 13% unemployed, I'm not going to do anything but everything that I can to get additional industry here that will provide the employment, but at the same time within safeguards to where I won't get criticized 15 years from now by somebody running for governor in retrospect talking about what we did in the 1980s. I now know I see what happened, and I'm prepared to correct it.
Governor Treen.
Well, I don't think that the approach is to make a modification of the industrial tax exemption. I think it served the state well. I think, though, that the laws, the pollution laws, should be enforced and enforced rigorously, and indeed I think this administration, the record will reflect that we've done so. We've gotten a lot harsher on these industries than they'd been treated before. The number of fines that have been imposed upon industries, for example, that have discharged into the river has increased, and that sort of thing. I think we should prosecute them criminally and prosecute civil cases against them whenever an industry damages the environment in any way. But I think that if you hold out the specter that the industrial tax exemption, which is given to a company based upon its intent to make usually massive investment, then I think that could get them very, very skittish about investing in Louisiana because they may find themselves or are concerned about the fact that some judge at some point will say, zip, there goes your industrial tax exemption because of this violation. I think the approach to take is to enforce the law and enforce it vigorously, let them know what the regulations are, and I think we're doing that in this administration. That's the approach that I would take.
The next question, reversing back down the panel, Bob Courtney has for Governor Treen.
Governor Treen, many corrections experts tell us that the primary causes of problems within prison systems across the country have been overcrowding, shortages of personnel, and a lack of hope on the part of inmates. Since taking office, you've done much to increase the number of prisoners within the system without building new prisons. Currently, there's a backlog of some 2,000 inmates in parish jails, and each year the state gets between 600 and 900 more inmates than it releases. Meanwhile, some inmates claim that your lack of action on pardons and commutations has led to a general feeling of a lack of hope on the part of inmates. Isn't this fast becoming a dangerous and expensive problem that goes far beyond politics, requiring long-range planning rather than short-term stopgap solutions?
Well, your insinuation that my actions in this area have been motivated by politics is off the mark. The fact of the matter is that in our original design of the program for using more prison space, we actually saved the people of this state, I think about $166 million by being able to utilize our prisons more efficiently. Now, the fact is, though, Bob, that we have constructed another prison in Washington Parish. Will give us 1,120 additional places, and that prison has been recently opened. There are approximately 2,000 prisoners in the parish jails, but there usually are about 500. We can take a prisoner from a parish jail if he has been convicted, but we don't have to take him unless that conviction is finalized by the appellate courts. Therefore, that many prisoners are not mandatorily to be transferred to the correction system. But the fact of the matter is that we are going to reduce that prison population substantially because of the Washington Parish Prison, because of the modular program which was begun, which will permit us to put additional prisoners in modular cells and dormitories at Hunt, at Wade, at several of our institutions. So we would expect, all told, and I happen to have the figures here, that we will have the prisoners in the parish jails down to approximately 500 by July 1, 1984. The average number of state prisoners in parish jails was 1,134 in the years that I've been governor.
Governor Edwards.
That's amazing. The prison in Bogalusa had its genesis in my administration. It was one of 4 that we started. It was completed, admittedly, and he did get to cut the ribbon or saw the bar or whatever they do when they open prisons. But he announced a year and a half ago he had solved the prison overcrowding problem, and there are now 1,800 prisoners in parish jails ready to go to the institutions, plus another 400 on appeal who are going to be ready as soon as their appeal's over with. And just July of this year, Governor Treen vetoed the matching funds for 23 parishes that were willing to put up that 30% in order to build facilities, and in one stroke of the pen, he checked off 23 parishes, and I have the list here, And in the last debate, he was talking about how Caddo Parish hadn't done this, that, or the other. It wouldn't have done him any good to do it. They'd have been parish number 24 that had got vetoed. A point I make is that all of us who recognize we live in a complex society with an exploding population are going to see more and more people in the institutions. It's a regrettable fact of life. I think that the figure of 15,000 for an inmate population inside the next 10 years is very realistic. We need to build more facilities, such as the one that was built in North Louisiana, which is a minimum security facility where 600, I think, inmates are, and make some preparations to deal with the local problem by doing what Governor Treen has not done, and that is release these funds so that these 23 or 24 parishes that want to build a facility will have the state match to do so, under a program, incidentally, which I started.
Next question, Ronni Patriquin for Governor Edwards.
Well, once again, it's a question essentially directed to both of you, but I'd expect you to answer first, Governor Edwards. Governor Edwards, the number 2 man in your administration, Commissioner of Administration Charles Romer, is now serving a federal prison term for conspiring to peddle his influence. Although the crime was not involved in any way directly with you, and it occurred while he was managing someone else's gubernatorial campaign. Governor Treen, your Commissioner of Administration, Bubba Henry, is facing charges before the State Ethics Commission that he used his position to help 2 friends and contributors, and that in return he got some financial help. How do you, both of you, think these incidents involving top men in your administration can be eliminated, and what will you do if you're elected to see that your appointees just don't get into any similar type troubles again?
It's awfully tough. You're dealing with a large number of people, and that fella has more or less control of the purse strings, contractual review, all kind of goodies come to that floor of the Capitol. It's awfully difficult for a governor with the press of other duties to watch that closely. And, you know, even if you watched, if you had a guy in there who wanted to abuse the trust you place in him, he could circle the wagons and hide things from you, and you wouldn't find out about it till it was too late. All that I can say is we will try to find people whose past reputations and business acumen qualify them for dealing with that element of the state's finances and the contractual review, etc., and hope that the trust is not violated. If we find that the trust is violated, then we'll try as soon as possible to get it corrected and replace them with someone else. It is a bad problem, and it's just like everything else in government. When you're at the top and people in whom you have faith and confidence violate your trust, you get some of the blame and some of the dirt falls off on you, but it's part of the price of being in this business, and it comes with the territory. I certainly regret it, as I'm certain he regrets it. It's something that I would try to avoid by hopefully getting people whose reputations and past records would lead you to the inescapable conclusion that that would not happen. But if you looked at Charlie Romer's past reputation and association with people, no reasonable person would have assumed in 1972 that that would have been the sad end to that person who otherwise had an unblemished record. I'll just try, and I'll try to watch as close as I can, because it's something that would concern me very much.
Well, first of all, the reputation of E.L. Henry, whom I appointed as Commissioner of the Division of Administration, was unblemished. And as a matter of fact, I think that the general feeling in the campaign of 1979 was that he was, of all the candidates running, perhaps the most honorable, the man of greatest integrity and so forth. He had a tremendous reputation for that. And I appointed him to that, and I still have confidence in Bubba Henry's reputation, a very strong confidence in it. There are some charges pending before the Ethics Commission now. These charges were leveled by my opponent in this political race. And so they're there. I'm a little bit surprised that a person in the news media that values our fundamental freedoms as greatly as you do, freedom of the press and so forth, would not recognize that a person is innocent until proven guilty. Certainly this is nothing but a charge before the Ethics Commission, and I have confidence in Henry. I've talked to him about these things, and I am totally convinced, I don't think I'm wrong, I think I'm a good judge of human nature, that he did not do anything morally wrong or unethical in that case. And so I'm willing for Henry to have his day before the Ethics Commission or before whatever tribunal he decides that he wishes to go.
All right, John Hill, you have a question for Governor Treen, and we are running short of time. I would ask each of you gentlemen to confine your remarks to 1 minute, your response.
Polls have shown that about 20 to 25% of the voters are undecided, and I suppose this is why you're spending $16 million to reach them. Polls also indicate that both of you, very well known, also have some pretty bad negatives. Mr. Edwards, they show that people believe that you do not tell the truth. Mr. Treen, they show that people believe that you're inept. What do each of you have to say to these voters to address these negatives of your own?
I'd rather be inept than dishonest, and I'm not saying that I agree. I'm not saying that I agree with your characterization, but you threw out two adjectives, so if I had to choose one or the other, I would say that. And of course, in my defense, I'd have to say, John Hill, that you're absolutely wrong. The accomplishments of this administration are lengthy. I wish I had time to go into all of them in every field, and I will use my closing 2 minutes to go into some in one particular area. That's why we need this campaign, is to lay out all of the things that this administration has been doing behind the scenes to a large extent and without a lot of fanfare. People say I don't toot my horn very much, and maybe I don't. Well, it's tooting time, and I'm going to start tooting it from now on until this campaign is over, the accomplishments of this administration. Perhaps in my style or something like that, people think because I don't shoot from the hip and I don't give that quick and ready answer that maybe Dave Treen is not thinking and working. But I've proved them wrong before, and I'm going to prove them wrong again. Thank you.
Well, I'd rather be inept than dishonest also, but since I'm neither, I have a hard time commenting on the question. But it is a problem that I have, a problem that haunts me, and I really don't know what to do about it. I wish I could. I wish everybody in the state could read my heart and read my mind, could listen to my phone conversations and had listened to every word that I've uttered officially since I've been governor. I really try, but when you've been in public life for 28 years and you've been under the intense scrutiny that I have been under, it is difficult to escape that completely because charges come out, investigations are made, allegations are made. It's free speech in this country. I can show you blazing headlines in the Morning Advocate accusing me of all kind of skullduggery that ended up with an apology on the front page the next Sunday, but nevertheless it's just like throwing a piece of dry dirt at a white wall. It doesn't stick, but it leaves a mark. And you have an accumulation of that through the years. And it's just something that I'll try as much as possible to be as open as possible to try to convince people that that is not a fair assessment of me. If there's one thing I'm going to do in the next 4 years, I may end up being called inept, but I'm going to end up being called honest because maybe it's better to be called honest than competent and effective. And I'm going to spend a great deal of my time, which is something I didn't do the last 8 years, convincing you and people like you that I am honest. It's part of my reason for running again.
Gentlemen, we're going to go now to your closing remarks. I apologize if we've had any problems with the time cues on this. This is a tight meeting, but we will be meeting again 1 week from tonight. And I would now ask Governor Treen to have his 2-minute closing remarks, followed by Governor Edwards.
Thank you. I think in two areas, among others, the accomplishments of this administration commend themselves to the people of Louisiana. Let's talk about fiscal management for a moment. We cut taxes to the extent of $250 million a year, principally in income tax, also occupational license tax. We're reducing inheritance taxes, and also some special exemptions for farmers and other people. We reduced the cost of state government on a per capita basis, adjusted for inflation and population, from $646 to $576. And I know people don't like figures, but the point is made here that for the first time at the end of a 4-year term, a governor can say that the cost of government, adjusted for inflation and population, has actually been reduced. We reformed capital outlay. We put out insurance for bids. In the past, all too often insurance was given to friends or cronies of the administration. We went self-insured on workers' compensation. We negotiated a Superdome contract which will provide millions, 18 millions of dollars over the next several years, returned for the promotion of the Superdome. We've saved hundreds of millions of dollars in capital outlay by eliminating the pork barrel type projects and putting the money where it really does the good: highways, bridges, universities, and hospitals. In the economy, which is on everybody's mind. several initiatives by this administration. The Louisiana Business Equity Corporation provides funds for people to get into small business. The Louisiana Minority Business Authority, another initiative of mine, permits minorities to get in through loan guarantees into this free enterprise system of ours. The enterprise zone legislation, which I talked about, passed 2 years ago, the venture capital legislation, and the Industry Assistance Act, all are acts designed to get our economy rolling.
And one thing you're not inept at is figures. That's what I said when we started this program. Probably what you say is true, but the bottom line and the facts are that the cost of state government have increased from $4.5 billion to $6.3 billion, the largest single increase in our state's history over a comparable period of time. That in spite of the fact that you made a solemn promise to cut down the cost and size of government when you ran in 1979. Same thing with the state's bonded debt. As I said in the last debate, which you argued with, but I can tell you now you were wrong and I was right. You've increased the state's debt by $1.15 billion, and you have another $100 million that you're going to sell in just 30 days, which is going to increase the annual cost of retiring state debt from $160 million a year to $308 million a year. That's how much more we're going to have to pay off the money that has been borrowed. You have transferred or transformed this state in 3.5 years from one which was lush, rich, doing well, with high employment, to one that is now bankrupt. The budget you just passed is at least $200 million out of balance. It's going to be a serious problem for me in the legislature next year when we meet in April. Be that as it may, we have much going for us in Louisiana. We can pick up the pieces and put it together. We can bring jobs back. We can show that industry that we will work with it and create the jobs and provide the economic stimulus for our state. I'm convinced that we can put the budget back in balance and put the funds in that were left out of the budget which you just passed for a number of programs that are very important to a number of people. As far as your reform on the Public Works, I ask people watching me, you go out your backyard or down the street and see if you can find where that money is. Because I tell you, very few people seem to know where the Public Works money went.
Gentlemen and ladies, we are out of time for this evening. I'd like to thank all of our participants in this debate. As the toss of the coin indicated, Governor Edwards had the last word this evening, but we will be back again 1 week from tonight, and we hope you'll join us then. I'd like to thank our panel of reporters, Bob Courtney, Ronni Patriquin, John Hill and Robyn Ekings, and the Louisiana JCs, our audience in the auditorium who were quite courteous, and our viewers at home. We could not possibly touch on all the important issues this evening, so we will see you again next week. It should be another interesting evening, and we hope you'll be there. For Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Beth George Courtney. Good evening.
Major funding for the production of Campaign 83, the TREEN-EDWARDS debates, is provided by Exxon Company USA's Baton Rouge refinery, a partner in growth with Louisiana since 1909.